Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about a controversial EV battery plant in Illinois, new property tax laws in the state, and paying for migrants who have come to Illinois. Then the Center Square's Dan McCaleb and Jim Telemonte will further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Kevin Bessler. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. The U.S. House has passed legislation which would prohibit batteries from Goshen and several other foreign companies from being used by the Department of Homeland Security. Jim Telemonte reports.
Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez was pleased that the House passed H.R. 8631, the Decoupling from Foreign Adversarial Battery Dependence Act.
Our government should not be spending tax dollars to procure batteries from companies that profit from slave labor or provide another avenue for the CCP to expand their surveillance apparatus here in the United States homeland.
Maryland Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey said the amended bill is imperfect, but he urged his colleagues to support it.
While these amendments have made the bill better, there are lingering concerns, including how a ban on Chinese-made batteries will impact DHS's ability to buy American-made electric vehicles.
Goshen is slated to receive more than $8 billion in federal and state subsidies for its planned facility in Manteno, Illinois. I'm Jim Telemonte.
Two new property tax laws in Illinois are being discredited by policy think tank as being meaningless. One law commissions the Illinois Department of Revenue to study the entire property tax system in the state, including a review of assessments, collections, and the tax levies themselves.
The recommendations, depending on what they recommend, that could lead to improvements in property taxes. But we've seen studies like this before. That is Illinois Policy Institute Director of Policy Research, Joe Tabor, who says Governor J.B. Pritzker mandated a similar directive to a task force in 2019 with little or no results. Tabor says the task force ignored the white elephant in the room. But they don't address the main driver of the issue, which is Illinois' unsustainable public pension system. Illinois has the second highest property taxes in the country, taxing Illinois residents more than 5 states combined. A Chicago alderman has proposed a new tax to pay for migrant care after a resident's rant about city spending went viral. Jim Telemonte has that story.
Jessica Jackson was one in a series of residents who blasted city council members at committee hearings.
We are taking no disrespect from a bunch of people who have broke into the country and now have completely broke the city.
After hearing from angry residents at the joint committee hearing on immigration and refugee rights and housing and real estate, Alderman Byron Siccho Lopez proposed a November referendum for voters to impose a 3% income tax hike on the wealthy to pay for migrant care.
We have 120,000 millionaires who live in the city of Chicago who can pay the fair share, and there are solutions so that we can do both. Care for new neighbors as well as the current neighbors.
Siccho Lopez is a member of the City Council's Socialist Caucus. I'm Jim Telemonte.
Those are the top stories of the week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square's Dan McCaleb and Jim Telemonte will further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, September 12th. The city of Chicago is staring at a $223 million budget deficit this year and a nearly $1 billion budget deficit in 2025. In response, Mayor Brandon Johnson announced a citywide hiring freeze. Greg Bishop has the day off, so joining me to discuss this is Jim Telemani, the Center Square Chicago-based reporter. Jim, you've been covering this massive budget deficit story in Chicago. How did we get here, and is a hiring freeze really going to fully address the issue?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, when you get $1 billion into the hole, you're going to need to do some major things. And it happened very fast. I mean, this was actually, Brandon Johnson came into office as mayor with a little bit of a surplus, actually. And a big part of this hole has come from migrant spending. And I talked with a Republican committeeman, Tyler Chastain, who's on the south side of Chicago. And he said, when you look at the budget, had it not been for the millions upon millions spent on the migrant situation, the city would actually still have a surplus. And at one point, the budget director, Annette Guzman, who came out with this budget forecast, she admitted a month or two before that at one point, the city was spending over $1 million a day. And she told a city council committee, well, this isn't sustainable. How they started spending that much in one day is another question, but at least they recognized it.
That $1 million a day, is that specifically for the migrant crisis?
Yes, specifically for the migrant crisis, for the shelter, essentially getting them in place, and
shelter, food, healthcare. I'm sure, which the state is giving additional dollars. Yeah,
yes, there were, and the state additional and the county. This was on top of state and county spending on this. So the budget director this week, in the wake of the mayor's office announcing this budget forecast, which again in fiscal year 2025, you're looking at over $982 million, so pushing $1 billion. And that's before figuring in the new Chicago Public Schools contract, which we haven't gotten to yet. Yeah, that's still coming. So that's still coming. And that's Brandon Johnson's pet. He was a CTU organizer. This is his baby. So the last thing he's going to want to cut is Chicago teachers, benefits and salaries. So she came out with this forecast, and then she's the one who was given the task of announcing these restrictions. At first, it was announced as a citywide hiring freeze. So media here in Chicago took that to mean that includes police and fire. Well, the mayor went back on that and said, no, that was a mistake. This does not affect police and fire. Overtime expenditures, stringent restrictions there, but again, except for public safety, and then what the budget office called stringent restrictions on travel. How much this is going to cut into $1 billion hole is questionable. Obviously, a responsible government agency would probably keep a close eye on these things anyway. But we've seen in his first year, Johnson he's committed to what he campaigned on. I mean, he's in the community. He's talking about city-owned grocery stores and city-owned city-owned government health clinics. So he's doing all this, but it's coming at a big cost.
And as part of your coverage, Jim, you talked to a professor, an economics professor at Loyola University of Chicago, who had some concerns about what it could mean for the future of the city, including potential tax hikes, potential Chicago, like the state of Illinois. Chicago has been losing population, moving to the suburbs, moving to other states. Tell us about your conversation with the economics professor, Frances Lee.
I was a little bit nervous in talking to her because I said, boy, I'm going to talk to an economics professor. Is she going to give me a bunch of answers with numbers that are just going to make my head spin? But actually, she broke it down very simply. My biggest concern is tax. If you increase property taxes or increase, again, real estate transfer taxes, that's going to continue this cycle of people leaving the city. In some cases for the suburbs, or in the state of Illinois, we see people leaving not just for sunny Florida and Texas and Tennessee, but our neighboring states are all growing in population. There are big subdivisions in Northwest Indiana that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. People have come across from South suburban Chicago. There are, southern Wisconsin, big communities that have sprouted up just across the border from Illinois. And I'm sure it's the same in Kentucky and Missouri and Iowa. We've seen that in Iowa too. So that was her big concern, that this cycle is going to continue if taxes are part of the solution. And regarding the hiring freeze, she had a great line. She said, well, we economists have a saying, we have full employment if you hire someone to dig a hole and hire another person to fill it. So if those are the jobs that the administration is going to cut, that's great. By all means, do it. But if you're going to cut police, if you're going to not have garbage picked up, well, that's going to cause more problems, make the city less desirable to live in, and you're going to continue that spiral where people are leaving.
$1 billion for a city. We're not talking about the state of Illinois here. We're talking about the city of Chicago. Now, granted, third largest city population-wise in the country, but that $1 billion is a big gap to make up, and it's further evidence, that this ongoing border crisis and the tens of thousands of migrants who have made their way north from the southern border into the city of Chicago. It's really handcuffing the city. It'd be interesting, scary, I guess, if you're a Chicago taxpayer, which you are, of course, Jim, because the state, Chicago has among the highest property taxes already in the country. Illinois is second only to the state of New Jersey for high property taxes. Why don't we move on, but stick with the subject of property taxes. Governor Pritzker this year signed a couple of bills meant to address property taxes in Illinois, but there's a new report out from a policy think tank that says the measures that Pritzker signed aren't going to do anything to bring down property taxes.
Right. There's one measure that would allow home rule municipalities to provide abatements for newly remodeled homes. But the Illinois Policy Institute says here, as in a report by our reporter Kevin Bessler, that this is only shifting the property tax burden. It's not really relieving. It may be relieving the people of the newly remodeled homes, but for those who don't make the improvements, they're now going to pay for these other homeowners' improvements, at least that tax burden, not for the actual repairs.
Right.
So again, this is just a shift. So I guess it's in a way kind of like the grocery tax. Well, we're going to cut your grocery taxes, but now your local municipalities are going to impose it, and they can actually impose a higher one. So it's moving, the old saying, robbing Peter to pay Paul, or taxing Peter to pay Paul, I guess would be in this case. So that's one. Another law allows the Illinois, or actually commissions the Illinois Department of Revenue to study the entire tax system, including a review of assessments, collections, and the tax levies themselves. So we're allowing government to assess government here. So do things ever get better for the taxpayer when that happens? Probably not. And we don't know how much this study is actually going to cost us the taxpayers. So it doesn't sound like a win-win for the people of Illinois.
And I want to say too, Jim, I don't know how many commissions there have been to study Illinois' insanely high property taxes. Just back in 2019, Governor Pritzker created a property tax study group. They came out with recommendations that went nowhere. So is this going to be another one of those studies that pushes the issue down the road and we don't really see anything from it? I know you don't really know the answer to that exactly, but it just seems to me we've done this. We've been here before.
Yeah, well, this is, again, perhaps kind of like digging the hole to fill the hole. We have a study, so a government employee can do the study, and another one can file a recommendation on the study, and then whether anything comes out of it, we'll see. But, as Kevin reported, the typical Illinois homeowner paid about $5,000 property taxes in 2022. Almost everyone's bills have gone up a lot since then, and the bills have gone up just time and time and time again, and it doesn't look like they're going down. And just to add to the tax parade, there is a non-binding referendum amendment that another thing the governor approved earlier this year. This is non-binding, but before the voters in November, raising income taxes on people who make $1 million or more. It's called the Property Tax Relief Amendment. So, but you're going to charge an extra 3% in income tax on, it's non-binding. So it's not going to go into effect if voters approve this, but it's will energize debate. And, I guess kind of like Mike Madigan had the Millionaire Tax that was on the ballot, must have been 10 years ago at least now. And it was just a talking point, the people overwhelmingly voted for it, but of course it never took effect because it wasn't meant to.
There was one that would have been a binding referendum just a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that went before voters, that would have changed the state's flat income tax system into a progressive income tax. Higher earners pay higher rates on their income. Voters rejected that right at the polls. So this tax conversation in Illinois, it seems like it just keeps circling back to the same old ideas. Not much talk about government spending and putting a check on that. Although it looks like Chicago, as we just talked about in the first segment, is going to have to do something there. They're certainly not going to close their budget gap by raising $1 billion on Chicago taxpayers, at least for the sake of Chicago taxpayers. I hope not. And both of these issues that we've led with here on Illinois in Focus, you have to wonder how much they contribute to this growing out migration problem. Illinois is losing population. Chicago is losing population, even though Governor Pritzker denies it. From the IRS, from the Census Bureau, then you've got the anecdotal evidence of the moving trucks. Far more moving trucks are moving out of Illinois than coming into Illinois. It's just an endless cycle. Last word on this one for you, Jim, if you have anything.
Oh, well, the governor was here in Chicago this week, and the Chicago press corps has been obsessed with this deficit. So I say, well, surely the state can come in and pay for it. Well, the governor said, well, I guess to his credit, we do spend billions of dollars each year on Chicago. And he said, we'll continue to do that. But he said he hasn't been approached in this case. And he said, well, our next budget doesn't come out till February. But the mayor has said the state owes the city of Chicago $1 billion for education. And, this is again part of the changed education model, which is weighted toward the Chicago public schools. So the Chicago voters even rejected the mansion tax, the so-called mansion tax, a short time ago that would have been an additional real estate tax on home sales over $1 million, and it was actually a lot of neighborhood, lower to moderate income neighborhood building owners who stepped in and said, well, no, and led the campaign to defeat that. It surprised me actually that lost here. Another
story that's been in the news for the past year or so, Jim, has to do with the Chinese electric vehicle battery maker, Gotion, which is looking to open a plant in Illinois. News out of Washington, D.C. this week, where the U.S. House of Representatives, and there's concerns about its ties to the communist government in China, the Gotion, similar plant looking to be built in Michigan, similar controversies where many folks don't want the plants built. But anyway, news out of Washington, D.C., the U.S. House of Representatives passed legislation that would prohibit the electric vehicle batteries from Gotion and several other foreign companies from being used by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security because of national security concerns. Tell us about this, Jim.
Yes, the Defense Department already does not use these batteries from companies that are they in their own rules will not use batteries from these companies that have close ties to the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Homeland Security, there was nothing keeping Homeland Security from potentially buying these batteries, which, according to national security experts, these could be used for surveillance. These could be used, for tracking, for all kinds of, cybersecurity has been a big issue of late.
Right.
And so the Florida Republican Carlos Jimenez was the leader of this legislation, and he said our government should not be spending tax dollars to procure batteries from companies that profit from, the Chinese Communist Party, and also there is slave labor involved here. About 5 or 6 years ago, we heard a lot about the Uyghurs, a population in Western China, mainly Muslim, who've essentially, satellite imagery and independent activist journalist types have said, well, these are essentially concentration camps. Some have even speculated, well, the average Chinese national who's in good standing with the government has no problem getting an organ donation if they're in need. And the speculation is that these are coming from the Uyghurs in these camps where people are disappearing and being disappeared, so to speak, by the government there. Not all it's difficult to verify these things in China, but there are pictures and things out there of these essentially that look like prisons where the Uyghurs are being held. And so there's slave labor tied to this in China, and then you have the Communist Party surveillance issues. And so this was a bipartisan vote, and even though Illinois, here we are, welcoming Gotion with millions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies, and yet both parties in the U.S. House vote overwhelmingly to prevent Gotion from providing batteries to Homeland Security because of these security issues. So apparently we don't have those concerns in Illinois government.
Yeah, just reading from your story here, Gotion is slated to receive more than $8 billion in combined federal and state subsidies for its planned new facility in Manteno. despite all of these concerns. That's just kind of mind-blowing, I guess.
And in Michigan, the people don't want it. The Green Charter Township is the location of the plant in Michigan, which would feed parts to the Illinois plant in Kankakee County in Manteno. And there was a recall election held, and the voters threw out 5 local board members who had supported tax breaks for Goshen in Michigan. Haven't seen that kind of large scale opposition here in Illinois, but as more of these concerns become apparent, and as it's a national security issue, really, you have to think there's going to be some more perhaps second guessing of this deal to give Goshen such a and we've talked about Goshen before. If Donald Trump were to be elected, he's opposed to these deals and could put the brakes on it potentially, but we'll see what happens in November.
Moving on, Jim, the University of Illinois has entered into an agreement with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights over complaints about numerous incidences of anti-Semitism on campus. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, we saw a lot of anti-Semitism reported in the spring when there were these widespread protests, the pro-Palestinian protests. And, just here in the Chicago area, there were some pretty ugly stuff happened at DePaul University. There were allegations of anti-Semitic things happening at University of Chicago and around the country. I mean, obviously, Columbia, New York was one of the epicenters of this. There were some schools in California. But all of the cases here involved in this story with the University of Illinois happened before any of that. And U of I had also some protests going on. So we don't know if there are additional incidents here. But the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, found 139 incidents of what it called shared ancestry discrimination. All but 4 of those were related to allegations of anti-Semitism. And these don't go back as far as 2015. The complaint was filed in 2020, I believe it was 2020. And so the big question I had I talked with Emily Briskman from the Jewish United Fund and also the Hillels of Illinois. I said, well, why does this take so long to address this? And she said, well, the legal ramifications involved combined with the fact just in higher education, especially these big schools, things move very slowly. And even the federal government moves very slowly. So she was very happy with this settlement that the University of Illinois has a resolution that there will be better protections against students in these cases and actual accountability. So she was very confident that this is a strong move, but it's really disturbing. And certainly for anyone who's a Jewish parent, you would really want to think twice before sending your young person to one of these institutions of higher learning, where these, whether it's your favorite Big Ten football school or one of these vaunted Ivy League, so-called halls of higher education, what's really going on in these places, and it's just very disturbing that what Emily Briskman said from there's just been a dramatic increase in these kinds of incidents over the past few years, and so it's a disturbing thing.
It is, Jim. We only have a few seconds left. I want to touch on one more story. That's the controversy over ShotSpotter in Chicago. Mayor Brandon Johnson wants to end the contract with them. That's a company that provides surveillance on public transit to identify whether there are guns present or not.
Yeah, well, the mayor's done with it, but Alderman David Moore introduced an ordinance which would order the city council to take a vote before funding could be rescinded for ShotSpotter. The mayor says that ordinance can't keep him from canceling it.
Jim, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com.